One, two, three. It's episode 9 of The Cruise. And this is Mr. Jim Grant.
Hello, welcome to episode 9. Coming up on today's show. This is Tuesday, the 26th of May. We're recording this. Hopefully, as you'll be seeing this on Thursday at 6 p.m. on Facebook and Thursday 9 p.m. UK time over on YouTube.
God
coming
willing.
up on today's show, we have got the HR 6666 bill, a devil of a COVID government surveillance bill. We're looking at evidence from Oxford University about a vaccine having only a 50% chance of working. We're also going to be covering general news about the fact that the lockdown may have reached a point of diminishing returns in terms of saving lives, and other non-COVID news. We're going to be looking at an 8-foot deep sinkhole reveals some Roman structures. We're going to be looking at the head of NASA leaving, and a two-faced kitten as well. And when I'm talking about two-faced kittens, I'm not talking about Mr. Dominic Cummings, who of course is in the news only a couple of days ago.
Whose barrel is this?
Yeah.
We're going for it. If you didn't say it, I was gonna.
Yeah, that's the overriding theme of the news at the moment, on this being the 26th of May. But myself and yourself have some interesting views on the whole Cummings thing. But of course, we like to try and cover the news that is in the mainstream but may not be getting the full mainstream attention. We like to sort of go beyond and look through the gaps of the news, if you like.
Down the cracks. What is it? I don't know. Put a light on it. It smells too. Yes.
And we're also going to be having the Cruise Community Corner as well. We got quite a lot of good feedback on episode 8, so there's a few points that our listeners wanted us to make. So,
I was thinking, Jim, that we could offer as prizes. If you win any of our various prizes, for example, you can request to have one of the stories that either Jim or I started finished. Because we go off on so many tangents, there must be 1,000 things that people are like, what? The hell are they talking about? What are they looking down cracks?
Like that.
Yeah, I like it as well.
I like our community of listeners taking us off on odd tangents. This evening I'm not subscribed to the Washington Times. It loaded up originally, but now it seems to
first I gotta tell you all about my. I gotta crowbar my story. Remember, I got to tell you I'm all excited to tell you my stories, Jim, because I've got all week, and I'm so pent up with the with the goings on that you've just mentioned. All as you and I both know, because we're looking down the cracks, the subterfuge of why all the attention is being paid to Cummings. All this, all as I think it's commonly referred to as a limited hangout. You know that there's like a nuclear explosion about to go off at any second, but you just start chucking hand grenades onto the golf course so that people are more distracted by that than worrying about that the whole planet's going to explode. And I think for me, that's the analogy of what the Dominic Cummings political furore is in the UK, and I was wanting to tell you, Jim, what it reminded me of on a very, very esoteric level, but all week it's just been making me think, and it sometimes it dovetails into people that I've already told you about in my life, but that like. I was just reminded as I was remembering this story over the week, just like how, when you're measuring the things you remember in your life, which things do you remember? And you like mainly, in my experience, you mainly remember near-death experiences are the most that you like are most vivid with that, like, or like yesterday as much as they were 20 years ago. And I was in this car with 4 paddlers, but it was a Datsun B210, and somewhere in the neighborhood of about a 1970 model, 1971, 72, early 70s, a quite famous car of that era, used often for rally racing, and this one was a little bit peppy, and it was my buddy Bob's, and he was Jim, what we didn't know in the late 80s was like, I don't know, sociopathic maybe, or like touched, or like you might just say, it might be rude to say autistic now, but things that we're more aware of now, that he was like fucked up. He did some fucked up stuff a lot, but when you're like younger, you just maybe don't clock it as quick. And so we're in his Datsun B210, and it was much like a rally car done up. It had 4 different colored quarter panels on it, but it was like sound, but it was like what he wanted to be a race car. And Jim, it's got like fucking at least a canoe and 3 kayaks on the fucking roof, which are like hanging beyond the racks to begin with, and 4 fucking men in it, like, you know, guys that eat like, I hate this, but it's true, and it's still hard for me even to believe it, Jim, but at this time in my life, when we would go on the rare time that we like went to town, because we lived in the woods, but halfway to town, we would treat ourselves and go to McDonald's, and I would have 5 Big Macs, Jim. I would have 5 Big Macs and a couple of cheeseburgers, Jim. I would have that each time we went, Jim, and I wasn't showing off. I was just like that hungry at that time. I was just like, you know, we're just like monsters going kayaking in a river, and we pull out to pass on like a gravel shitty old back road, and we come abreast this vehicle, Jim, that like just like madness of life decides to not want to give way, just doesn't want to let us fucking by. And we're just with 4 big fucking boats on top and 4 big dudes in this little car on a shitty gravel road, just right side by side with some cunts beside us who are like putting on the juice a little bit, right? Like it becomes quite obvious, you know, that feeling, that like spider sense of like, are these guys not letting us fucking by, or what's going on here? And then that like momentary realization becomes the realization that no, they're actually like, they're fucking giving it a bit themselves. Like we're in kind of a seesaw battle, right? Like you start to realize that there's like some ego involved, Jim, for some fucking reason. 2 clowns in the middle of fucking nowhere on the you know, Canadian wilderness, middle of nowhere, are deciding to fuck with each other, right? And then even more crazy than what's happened already, as I tell you this, just like because Bob is Bob, as I've somewhat foreshadowed to you, he decides, Jim, out of nowhere, that he's like gonna fucking like, he'll race the guy, right? Like starts to put the hammer down a bit, but there's no hammer to put down because there's 4 huge fucking guys in a Datsun B210 with 4 fucking huge boats on the top of it, and it's like barely going anywhere. And all the the cars are both making a lot of noise, and the gravel's spitting, and there's fucking, so you know, the sound of the fucking little pebbles hitting the sides of fucking panels on the car, and it's just like, it's tense. And this fucking buddy of mine who's next to me in the back seat, who's one of like the most decent human beings I've ever met before in my life, Jim, just like one of my like one of those people that like, in fact, I can give you some tiny background of the guy who I'm sitting next to at this point. He's the only family I've ever known in my life, actually, that gave me a car. Like just those kind of people, just, and they aren't wealthy at all, but they like knew that I needed to get 12 hours home, and there's no flights, and it was like, you know, Christmassy time, and they just gave me the keys to drive away with their car. And I used to think these people are like, they're the exemplar, the par exemplar of like how friendly Canadians are. And then I got older and I traveled a bit, and I realized, no, they're Irish. I realized that their friendliness comes because they're fucking like totally just happy-go-lucky, not, you know, partisan, just live life for living life. So one of the nicest dudes beside me in the back seat just starts going fucking nuts, right? Just like fucking, like there's theater going on all around me, Jim. Out the window is like death and reality and a fucking race with a car on a gravel fucking road. Matt's starting to get tense. He's next to me in the back seat. And Jim, as I fucking stand here, like the reason I still remember this now is because there's an oncoming car, Jim. There's an oncoming car on a shitty gravel road in the middle of fucking nowhere outside of a place called Kamloops, British Columbia, and we're just humping it down this shitty fucking... There's noise and engines fucking screaming and gravel's fucking blah. And right beside me in the seat, like fucking touching my shoulder, Matt just starts going fucking... I just fucking like lost it. Like as much as a human in one place can explode like himself a grenade, just like... Stop the car! Stop the fucking car! And we didn't stop. We didn't fucking slow down, Jim. The fucking oncoming vehicle, I'll take this to my grave, as it came by, I still don't know how 3 cars got through, Jim. We continued. There was no pullback. Nobody adjusted. It just happened. The fucking one car that was coming at us must have just about taken our fucking mirrors off. Similarly, the car, like we must have been touching the people we were fucking racing. And it all happened just like, wow. And at this point, like Matt literally was like fucking knocking me out with his wrist, just going, stop that fucking car! Stop that fucking car! And finally Bob like comes to his senses a little bit, like just fucking coming to, imagine coming to your senses there, like fucking there's fucking cracked windshields and everyone's saying fucking, they don't even know why, just freaking the fuck out. And he pulls over down a little fucking embankment, gravel fucking road, and like we exploded out of that car, Jim. We fucking blasted out of that car like a clown car, right? Just like fucking just 4 guys like on their own, like 4 separate plans, just the doors blasted open and we're fucking out. And Matt slammed his door. Matt slammed his door like fucking just like put his force into just fucking like really, really winging on it. And like one of the most surreal things I've ever seen in my life, Bob, again, whose car it is, goes, "Hey, watch the door." I kid you fucking not. I kid you not, that happened. It was one of the most surreal. And to me, Jim, I thought all week, that's what the infraction that they're blaming on Dominic Cummings is in terms of the reality of the mess of our governance. That's like, hey, he drove too far and he broke curfew, but there's also like he's a non-scientific actor in contributing to the science model that is easily, as you've already foreshadowed again with the upcoming articles, one of the greatest debacles that's ever been experimented on humanity, and we're part of it.
Speaking of experimenting on humanity, next article. Coronavirus disappearing so fast, Oxford vaccine has only a 50% chance of working. And that is from Monday the 25th of May by Sky News. Professor Adrian Hill describes the efforts to create a vaccine as a race against the virus disappearing and against time. The University of Oxford's Jenner Institute and the Oxford Vaccine Group began developing a COVID-19 vaccine in January using a virus taken from chimpanzees. But with the number of UK coronavirus cases dropping every day, there may not be enough people to... Coronavirus disappearing so fast, Oxford vaccine has only 50% chance of working. Professor Adrian Hill describes the effort to create a vaccine as a race against the virus disappearing and against time. This is Monday the 25th of May, so this was yesterday, and it's from Sky News. The University of Oxford's Jenner Institute and the Oxford Vaccine Group began developing a COVID-19 vaccine in January using a virus taken from chimpanzees. But with the number of UK coronavirus cases dropping every day, there may not be enough people to test it on, according to the Institute's director, Professor Adrian Hill. We said earlier in the year that there was an 80% chance of developing an effective vaccine by September, but at the moment, there's a 50% chance that we get no result at all. We're in a bizarre position of wanting COVID to stay, at least for a little while. What do you think of that, Craig?
I think my opinions remain the same. I'm sure yours haven't shifted that much. That story isn't going to shift my goalpost too much on the pursuit of the coronavirus vaccine. We've been looking for one since the beginning of time. There's a reason why we don't have one, because it's one of the most temperamental challenges to science, and it's not gone particularly well, and it's trying to combat something that's not particularly fatal. So there's all kinds of converging factors that are working very much against an effective coronavirus vaccine. Such high risk in vaccination for something that's so low risk in the wild is a great science, obviously. They also have as we've shown on earlier episodes, this phenomenon of what do they call it? Pathogenic priming, or what's the term again? When it's the opposite, paradoxical reaction, where people who are vaccinated against coronavirus, when they're introduced to a wild coronavirus strain, then they actually have a greater, almost an autoimmune allergic reaction. So their situation is not only bad, but it then becomes potentially fatal again for something that's not that challenging for the majority of the public. So it's a great challenge, isn't it, for science? It's to me terrifying that it's such a overwhelming necessity. It turns out I often have a laugh, Jim, just because anybody who thinks that we're going to create a useful coronavirus vaccine by September, or even a year and a half, or you hear some of the projected numbers, the fact is that because we haven't had one for so long, that you have to now think the reason we don't have one as yet, and we've been looking so passionately for so long, is because we weren't urgent before. It turns out before we weren't just going out of our fucking minds, but now that we're losing our shit trying to do it against some sort of fictional clock, it's the ingredient that we needed. So you can just picture scientists just running around with beakers and Bunsen burners and balancing fucking pipettes and all the nonsense that you assume that they got to interact with in the lab to get this done quick, Jim. But what they really need is a contract with DARPA.
So on my next article, I'm going to read out and then dovetail into the whole Cummings thing. Give my view on that. But first of all, I want to read out this article. This is from 4 days ago. This is by Lizzie Dearden, Home Affairs correspondent, and this is from The Independent. Boris Johnson and Jennifer Arcuri investigation hampered by deleted evidence, Watchdog says. Destruction of email and phone records from time as Mayor of London may have prevented IOPC from reviewing relevant evidence. Evidence required to establish whether Boris Johnson may have committed misconduct in public office has been deleted, a watchdog has said. The Independent Office for Police Conduct, IOPC, examined the Prime Minister's dealings with businesswoman Jennifer Arcuri and whether her company benefited financially from their relationship. The allegations related to events and trade missions between 2013 and 2015 during Mr. Johnson's time as Mayor of London. IOPC investigators said they were unable to access evidence from any email accounts, computer drives, or digital devices used by Mr. Johnson and his appointees at the time. Now, my whole point on this is exactly. My whole point on this is, when I first heard about the Neil Ferguson being pulled over, not pulled over, but
pulled up.
with pants down, with his married though. And again, I don't care where he puts his penis, just care about the hypocrisy of it. And when I hear about the whole Cummings incident, my natural reaction is to think, and again, I'm just a comedian, news monkey. I see the news.
Yeah.
I give an opinion.
Sure.
Call it as I see it. I know nothing more than that. I have no sources, no investigation. I am not a journalist. I am. The news is the organ grinder. I am the clapping monkey, just regurgitating it and occasionally giving an opinion.
Sure.
But what I did think was usually this sort of stuff is quite easily swept under the carpet, isn't it? You know, you're pulled over visiting a married man. I mean, I know nothing. I've got never been in the police force or anything like that. But you hear all the time about evidence going missing from here, deleted evidence being there, no one being called up on it, stuff like this. Basically, my point is what seems to come out, at least initially, you know, you can sometimes get the truth out over the years, like pulling teeth, like the Hillsborough fire and things like that. But what seems to come out initially is usually what the police and the media want to come out, and you can probably add in government into that as well. I think it's fair to say, I'm not being conspiratorial minded to say that some things, some stories don't see the light of day. Now, when I see this is quite clear that Johnson has, you know, well, in the IOPC investigate as well as evidence from email accounts, computer drives and digital devices. You know, they didn't get any access to anything like that. So,
what do you mean? Like,
why now?
You mean like wipe them? You mean like wipe them with a cloth?
Yeah, you know, why now is all this coming out? It would imply to me that the government either want this story to come out, and it's given them a huge 16-point dip in the polls, or the police aren't doing their usual courtesy work and public relations and diplomacy with politicians and things like that. You know, what I'm saying is that there must have. It would be naive to think, and I have no evidence for it, but it would be naive to think that someone in the police force at this point, if they didn't get any email accounts, computer drives, digital devices, and there's nothing being done about it, they're just going, oh, by the way, you know, we've got nothing. Sorry about that. For it to have nothing and nothing to be done about them having nothing would imply some degree of
chicanery.
Politicians and police being able to work with good professional working relationship is what I'll say from the kindest non-conspiratorial point of view that I can say, and non-accusatory way of saying.
Do you mean an alphabet agency?
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
I do.
For this stuff to come out tells me that either that relationship has changed. Do you know what I mean? There's more to this than meets the eye. Why are such minuscule, you know, things coming out? And I get it. It's great hypocrisy from both Cummings and Ferguson. I'm just saying, you know, it's not like they were caught with a dead hooker in the van of the car or something. Do you know what I mean?
No, but the government, the administration that they belong to, has been caught incinerating wholesale elderly people in care homes. There's a much, you know, larger agenda at stake there, aside from the rewiring of government while this, like, you know, faux lockdown that the can keeps getting kicked down the road for on spurious, reasons. It to me represents subterfuge. I think they're in an any port in a storm scenario. I think it's perfect, Jim. I think it's like, it's pervasive and intense, and every, like, you know, in honesty, it's probably a poorer reflection on my character. If I go to my Twitter feed, I can honestly say, just like our conversation began, it's tiring. It's like, I've seen for sure, Jim, today, 4 tweets in a row that reference Cummings. Right, like it's dominant, and it's revealing little. To be fair, it's like it's like, it's a parlor game. It's there's nothing, there's no salacious content. There's the little bit of, the rabbit hole of the nonsense about going for a drive to test your eyes. There's a bit of like play on the side, but there's no there's no concrete evidence of anything other than the original infraction against the lockdown. So to me, against like revealing, in fact, anything, because I, like yourself, have to say, Jim, I don't know. We don't know. We don't know what the hell's going on behind closed doors, but we definitely know that there are things going on behind closed doors that they would rather have going on with nobody looking and nobody talking about it, nobody peeking at all, because they're too busy worried about whether or not Cummings said bluebells to his wife, or whether or not the 72-year-old or 94-year-old witness to that event was a plant of, which I'm seeing, and maybe you've seen as well, on social media. That's the next thing that you see, are accusations of political operatives on the, on the British Labour side, right? So you have bots on both sides. I've seen people bring this up as well, who I admire on social media, that are talking about, we're in a bot war, Jim. There's war. There's conservative bots attacking Labour bots, attacking other stripe of politics bots, and any of that is more important than revealing that the government actually moved people who were known to be infected from hospitals with a deadly disease and the age category of the most vulnerable people, that they moved those people to in care homes. And that's like, they've talked about this out loud, Jim. This is like malfeasance in office. These are, to a degree, in a perfect world, they're criminal charges. If you're overseeing things that have the potential of, showing your liability in deaths, which this entire debacle has done in spades. We haven't even got to the bottom of in prior episodes. It's known now that there's a death spike that's 2/3 unanswered, nothing to do with COVID, that they're already like trying to get to the bottom of. So we're in a place where if they want to talk about Dominic Cummings and whether or not he was like, going out for coffee or what the hell he was up to in Durham, they'd be thrilled if we could talk about that till the cows come home, Jim. Anything, any chat about that. Because where's it going to lead? Do you think he'll quit? Do you think he'll resign? I don't think so.
Yeah, or the complete lack of PPE for the
all of it,
nurses and doctors.
Totally.
300 deaths of medical staff now.
Totally.
Yeah, there's lots of things. So that was my
negligence.
Point. Usual little things don't see the light of day, and I didn't want to just say that without any source. You heard me just read out the article from only 4 days ago about Johnson's, all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm not just saying that willy-nilly. Trivial stuff that don't involve dead bodies, it doesn't seem to get the light of day or much attention at the time.
Right.
So for this stuff to get a lot of attention at the time, I find it either something has changed with the working relationship between media, police and government, or nothing has changed and this is by design for this story to come out. One of those two options leaps to the forefront of my mind. Speaking of things changing, this is from the Mail. This is an article on the 25th of May, so again yesterday, by Mary Keck-Atos, senior health reporter for the Daily Mail, who says it is suspending its trial of anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine in coronavirus patients, citing safety concerns, a day after Trump boasts about finishing his prescription. Hydroxychloroquine is most typically used to treat malaria. Are you laughing because I said the word without messing up for the first time in like 9 episodes?
Well done.
Treat malaria, lupus and arthritis. The WHO has been testing the drug as part of its Solidarity trial, looking at the safety and efficacy of 4 medications against coronavirus. But a study on Friday revealed higher mortality rates among COVID-19 patients who took the drug. On Monday, the WHO announced it was suspending the hydroxychloroquine arm of its trial over safety concerns. So that's interesting because I've seen a lot of good studies on that, and I've seen a lot of things. This stuff's quite cheap because it's non-patentable because it's been around for a while. So, however, other arms of the trial are continuing, including testing of the experimental drug remdesivir and an HIV combination therapy. I wonder if those drugs are patentable. Again, I don't know, but
well, they're certainly they're in a different category with their value, aren't they? Or their cost,
yes.
Not their value.
Well, that would be an allegation, wouldn't it? Are they? Because who knows? Perhaps the hydroxychloroquine proved very effective in a previous strain of COVID-19, because I saw studies saying, and a New York doctor was singing its praises. Perhaps we are now in another mutation and hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, and the WHO are quite correct. Remember, the WHO are the people that said in early January there was no human-to-human transmission, and were all about, no, it doesn't come from a lab, despite all the Nobel Prize winners saying that it did. So I'm afraid the WHO, their reputation for competence has taken a hell of a beating, and we could probably do a whole episode on things the WHO said about COVID that we would look back and laugh at, and already add on to that the whole idea that, you know, YouTube and Facebook are censoring anyone that doesn't go along with the WHO. You know, at what time stamp was that? You know, because the WHO have contradicted themselves on many an occasion. So that's the way free speech should work. That's the way science should work. Question yourself, question the research, question everything
in front of everyone.
Come up with best possible answers, and then therefore the best possible conclusions, analysis, and you can get the job done a bit better. But no, let's just stick to our own world and question nothing. That's how humanity progresses forward, isn't it? So interesting. We shall see about what the World Health Organization's motives were there. Again, you know, you can argue it isn't very good anymore because the mutations changed, or you could possibly look into the fact that there are maybe more financial motives at stake there. Keep your eyes peeled to Cruise, because I'm certain we'll keep an eye on this situation and update our listeners on it as it turns out. You know, we'll be looking around the world for, does this hydroxychloroquine still work? And if so, what are the motives for the WHO taking it off the list? But
I do, not to be too much of a bleeding heart, but I know that you have a heart as well, Jim, and it may not come across that I do also, but I do have that just now a pang in thinking of what a shake of confidence it is for people, and I'm talking like, you know, the people who, for bad luck, have a horrible reaction to this, Jim. The ones that you and I know are like in the number of kind of 1 out of 10,000 at the minute. But the people who are, say, under 65 and, you know, happen to, I think the number was quoted recently on the BBC, unsurprisingly, but I think the number under 65 who have died, what they would say of COVID in the UK is, I think, in the neighborhood of 250, 300. So it does, like, you can lose the lottery. You can be a 40-year-old, you know, person who, I don't know, you lick a door handle or whatever happens, but you get ill and you die. But even worse than that, now people who are really having heavy reactions, because I think you and I both, again, know the illness profile, which is quite specific for COVID. It's like a 3-week thing, and by the second week, you should either start to get better, or the ones that don't make a turn for the worse. And now we're in a place where there's just suddenly, like you were talking about, it's quoted by doctors as, I believe, 100% efficacy. There's doctors that have said that. I know, I've watched that, where they're like, everyone we've treated has come through. And you and I both, again, know that that means like showing heavy symptoms, really, really having a rough time. And then like literally they show them. I've seen them, interviews where they like walk out of the hospital a day later, 2 days later, and there's like, geez, that was close, you know, like suddenly a lot better. So it's frustrating to think that there's just something else that's shaken the confidence of you know, anybody who might unfortunately contract and start to feel this ill.
Yeah. And moving on to our next article, it's interesting you said, you know, think we're in this place, but things just seem to get worse. Well, we've talked from episode 1, Craig, about the idea that, you know, we weren't anti-lockdown, we were just thinking about the fact that it might have downsides as well.
Totally.
And we were all about weighing up those scales, but the idea that there is no downside to a lockdown is farcical.
Yeah.
You know, we don't deny there's a good point to it as well, but there is a downside to it. And but there are more evidence suggested from nations like Sweden and Japan to say that long term, in terms of amount of damage done, a lockdown might not have been the way to go. But the British and Japanese cultures are very different. So I'm certainly up for debate on the fact that there's good and bad points to a lockdown. But
especially once we killed their emperor. Well, sorry, we didn't kill their emperor. I mean, killed the concept of their emperor. Then we became a lot less like the British.
Yeah, it took a couple of nukes to do it. So this is by Jason Lemon, again yesterday, the 25th of May.
Yeah.
This is for Newsweek. Japan ends coronavirus emergency with 850 deaths and no lockdown.
Yeah, I saw
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced the end of his state of emergency declaration for the coronavirus pandemic, with just 851 deaths reported and without ever implementing a lockdown. So he's gone down the Sweden route, and it seems to have worked for him. Our battle against the virus will continue while urging the Japanese people to continue to following stringent social distancing guidelines. So social distance guidelines, but no actual lockdown.
And no sniffing girls' panties for like 3 weeks or something. So when you're down at the local train station and you feel that chinkle in the pocket there, like I might just have enough yen to go and get myself some little girl's underwear and a coffee. You don't know, whether to. Well, you do. You have to admire Japan on a lot of levels. I've had some wild times in Japan, Jim. You get Heineken out of the same concession machines as they have, used women's underwear is one of the famous things. Girls get paid to wear underwear for a day and then package them up and have businessmen smell them on the way home. And just, while they're having a prawn cracker on the side, bento box on the side. But what did I have going on? There were 3 things on TV. I'm remembering one night where I was just running back and forth to the vending machine, getting a Heineken, coming back into the room, and they had a sumo tournament, which was amazing, and then a really violent porno, Jim. Just like I was between tugging myself off and thinking I should call the cops, like at various intervals. It was one of the weirdest cultures to ever interface with. But there was also sushi, but they weren't eating it. I can tell you. Okay, so it was pretty. It was a pretty nice. I'll tell you what it was. Is that every sex scene had a guy that showed up and beat the other guys up and then had sex with the lady. That was the premise of the whole thing. And I'd never seen nothing like that before. I was a long way from Kansas that night, Jim. But I applaud them on their coronavirus effort. They've done well.
Another person that I assume would do as well.
Yeah.
Lockdown saved no lives and may have cost them, Nobel Prize winner believes. Professor Michael Levitt of Stanford University predicts that the UK will be rid of COVID within weeks. Lockdown caused more deaths than it saved, a Nobel laureate scientist said on Saturday, as he predicted the UK would emerge from COVID within weeks. Michael Levitt of Stanford University, who correctly predicted the initial trajectory of the pandemic, sent messages to Professor Neil Ferguson in March telling him, the influential government advisor, he had overestimated the potential death toll by 10 or 12 times. The Imperial College professor's modelling, a major factor in the government's apparent abandoning. That's Neil Ferguson, Professor Pantsdown, by the way. Abandoning of so-called herd immunity policy was part of an unnecessary panic virus which spread among global political leaders, Professor Levitt now tells The Telegraph. So this is a guy that was apparently wrote to Neil Ferguson and said he'd got it wrong, and he's sticking by his thing that said we shouldn't have gone into lockdown.
Yeah, yeah. Hindsight's 2020, but as you mentioned, both of us felt the same way. There's pros and cons. That's all you ask for, isn't it? Don't you just wish that they would treat all deaths as important rather than just the ones that that we need to be focused on? Apparently, it's so sad, Jim. It's I know it's redundant. I know you've talked about it. I know I've talked about it. I know the people, if anybody's watching, that you've talked about it with your friends. That people who decided not to go to the hospital because they felt something in their chest and now they're dead. That's even more cynically, some of those are written down as a COVID death when they're actually a fear of COVID death. People that decided to not get that thing that has given them a bit of gyp, and that thing turns out to be now it's cancer, and it's 3 months later, and treatment is that much delayed, and it's funny. You see, I've looked at it myself over the last week, how important that these same actors tell us that early detection is, that early warnings are, and they're part of the same the same players that that have decided to minimize hospital space and not use the overflows. We know that the Nightingale hospitals weren't used, Jim. 4,000 beds, I think, in Birmingham and 4,000 beds in London, and they only treated 50 people in them. And suddenly all these other hospitals that they kept open, waiting to be swamped, waiting to be bogged down, means that all these other people are dying. All different people are dying. A whole new and those ones, Jim. Have you seen the projected numbers? It's just like there are people like the fella that you've just quoted there that talk about it being like for years, for decades ahead. People are going to be devastated by the other effects of what lockdown has done. Other types of deaths,
Yeah, we'll be coming on to that in a minute. But,
great. Oh, God.
Just backing this up, this is by Christy Cooney on the 22nd of May. This is from The Sun. Down and out lockdowns made no difference to coronavirus, but destroyed millions of livelihoods worldwide, JP Morgan study claims. A paper by Marko Kolanovic, a strategist at the investment bank, argued that governments were spooked into imposing lockdowns that were late or inefficient. So that's more or less backing up what the Nobel laureate guy said, which it doesn't seem to be doing. No, this is not an article from The Sun. This is from something different. This is an article from MSN, and while it loads,
They're good.
Just briefly what it's about. They've had a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks, according to California doctor. So, California doctor calls for end to lockdown. Yikes. The doctor in charge of the Bay Area California Trauma Center said the state should end its lockdown orders over an unprecedented spike in suicide attempts amid the coronavirus pandemic. We've never seen numbers like this in such a short period of time. Dr. Mike D. Boss-Blanc, head of trauma at John Muir Medical Center, told local station ABC7. I mean, we've seen a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks. He added that he thinks it's time to end the state shutdown. For me, it's all about numbers, which causes the least amount of deaths. But I think it's important to look at the fact that we may be well reaching the point of diminishing returns worldwide upon this whole lockdown thing.
It's brutal. It's just brutal. It's hard, it's hard not to think of every death and its fallout, and it's to not be totally melancholy. We obviously have the desire to be humorous all the time. We all have that bug. We wouldn't be speaking to each other otherwise. But it's the gravity of this. We're just seeing death statistics all the time, Jim. It just like the multiplicity of human suffering, and that's before you get into the. Have you seen the starvation numbers that they're talking about globally? They're asking.
I've seen them. A lot of them down in Africa as well.
We're just in a place where, you know, human suffering is a pinnacle, and how many was it? The 8 or 20 or the 5 different the billionaire class that brought themselves up by quadruple over the lockdown period. Have you seen that one? The top boys, Bezos and Zuckerberg, and who's the other? Gates, I believe, is the other one that's focused on. But, you know, there's people that are coining it. They're coining it. They're turning over the big bucks, and there's like starvation looming, and people topping themselves at, you know, a month's got a year's worth of attempts in it, and it's just, we just live in there's so much pain and suffering out there, and, you know, it's hard to be positive.
Yeah, I can't remember if I didn't actually queue up that article, but I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where, you know, the rich have got richer.
Yeah.
Or the usual suspects have got richer, for sure.
Well,
but
yeah,
that's an article that's it's easily possible that people can look for themselves.
Yeah.
Here's another one. This is from the 22nd of May, 2020. This is from the Mirror. Police could enforce spot checks at people's homes with £1,000 fines for quarantine flouters. Home Secretary Priti Patel is expected to outline the new regulations at Friday's briefing, but the draconian step has been slammed by some, including some within the Conservative Party. International travellers, including returning Brits, could face police spot checks and £1,000 fines if they fail to self-isolate on arriving in the UK. Those coming into the country must provide an accommodation address where they will quarantine for 14 days under the measures to guard against a second wave of coronavirus. So I'm all for that, as long as it doesn't have, and I'm scrolling down to see, I'm going to give a little bit more detail on this one. I wanted to check that it doesn't breach any British citizens' rights to have their door put through without a warrant. I'm very, very much against that. I'm all for quarantining people for 14 days when they come in internationally. I mean, you and I called for that from podcast number 1, saying, you know, it's ludicrous that they're keeping the borders open, but having all us in domestic lockdown. So I'm all in favour of that. But there must not be a breach of basic human rights of the British citizen, which is, you know, no entry to an Englishman's home is his castle. Everyone's home is their castle. Every person's around the world, that's their home, and they are the king of their home, the king of their own castle, and the police shouldn't have a right to enter it without a warrant. That, as long as that's observed, I'm fine with the police doing spot checks to check that they're actually quarantining. But like I said, no forced entry without a warrant.
Well, you are not going to like the future, Jim Grant. You're not going to like what's coming down the pipe, and has already come down the pipe in New Zealand. You know, they're already the cops don't need anything beyond their own suspicion to enter dwellings now, and that's like, you know, tyranny exists. It's among us. And I find it funny that these things are being introduced to us now, when this is like a repeat story to my ears of what's already been thrown down in Canada. That gauntlet's already been, you know, presented, that if there's any quarantine breaches, that the government, you know, wants powers to be able to be quite draconian. And when I say that, what's actually interesting and curious is there are already places in the world, and this is what I thought that you were going to broach, and I'd be you know, interested your opinion on it, is, are they allowed to, because they're already doing it again in other parts of the world, to use electronic surveillance to keep you in that dwelling? So that's, you know, what's happening, that they're getting people to be like electronically incarcerated, essentially. Not dissimilar to if you were a criminal who is out on parole and has a leg ankle bracelet. That's already going on. So it's funny to me that they're just saying it like Priti Patel introduces it to the British public as like it's some new thing that the Brits dreamt up, when I wouldn't be surprised if they're the ones that sent it to the Canadians to begin with. We're just also interlocked. That's why I bring up New Zealand, because we should all be fighting for those pricks. As much as their soil is, depleted of selenium, and there's more sheep than humans, and they beat you at rugby pretty regularly, we got to leave all this shit aside and say that these are our brothers and sisters who are being utterly jackbooted, by I guess earnest and well-meaning MPs, political representatives that are just giving away massive rights to the state and not imagining the repercussions of a more nefarious state using these powers that have been given by well-meaning people. I'm trying to be polite, Jim, but like the fact is that cops kicking down your door is exactly what the Nazis did. It's why the Dutch, if you remember the Holland of 20 years ago, back when it was even more free than it is now, or even like further back, they're the inverse or the converse of the Nazis. Like, everything that the Nazi cops did, the Dutch cops had no power to do in the birth of their post-Nazi country. And that's something I always loved about, the idea that the cops could never enter your place in Holland. There's no fucking way. They'd call first. They'd be like, do you mind if we pop by and check your shit out? Which, that's what we have to get back to. And we're now in places where the Brits are, looking at... I agree. We can agree on what you and I have already agreed on. It makes sense if you're going to self-isolate, to have yourself in that system. But we just have this world now that's gone stupid because everybody who's like a two-bit sheriff or a security guard has a drone that's like telling strangers to keep off the fucking grass. We're just in mad world. So how much power can we give these pricks on the idea that we're going to stay in a house? It just seems so. And if you look at the, I don't know, are they proposing the fine numbers, because that's previously been the main focus of the story, because they've just been like ridiculous, like thousands and thousands of dollars of fines if you leave the abode that you gave as an address.
I think you can use existing laws to
exactly
that quarantine just fine.
Exactly.
If there's evidence that this person has been leaving their house, then it can be sent to the police. The police can then go around there with a warrant and say, we have reasonable evidence and suspicion to say that you are breaking your quarantine. Here it is. Now we do have a right to come into your property to see if you're there as a result of a warrant, having gone through the legal system that's worked in this country just fine for a couple of 100 years. Yeah. So that would be, I'm fine with the law. I would want to see how it's being implemented. Because we said before about that's the danger of one-dimensional thinking. Yes. We said that in our last podcast where it's, hey, here's a really good cause, and everyone jumps on it. Yeah, we can all agree on that cause, and then you read the small print and you're like, oh, that's going to do more harm to our societal democratic state than the actual thing which we protect against, So moving on to our next article. This is from The Hill by Marty Johnson. CDC acknowledges making... sorry, I can't see that. Let me just move it down. It's being a little bit bastardy, this one. Let's move it down. CDC acknowledges mixing up coronavirus testing data. This is on the 21st of May, so this is not an article that you would... we were reading out similar articles on our first podcast in March, Craig, but there you go. It seems to see the same things happening again. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, acknowledged Thursday that it is combining the results from viral and antibody COVID-19 tests when reporting the country's testing totals, despite marked differences between the tests. First reported by NPR's WLRN station in Miami, the practice has drawn ire from US health experts who say combining the test inhibits the agency's ability to discern the country's actual testing capacity. And we've seen the same thing over here again,
Yes.
didn't we? There was
That's what I thought.
numerous articles where they've got the numbers wrong, or they've counted this twice or anything like that. Basically, what we can take from this is, because I always said in the first couple of weeks, there isn't a single government department that works efficiently or competently, in my opinion. And that's not a knock on any of the staff. These people have all been, there's no incentive for them to provide good customer service, because no one's ever going to hold any government to account, really. And that's the same thing we've said in previous podcasts with the whole Dominic Cumming things, or the deaths in the care home things. The British public don't seem to do anything about it. In America, agree right or wrong, they go and protest. In France, they had the Yellow Vest movement. I'm not saying whether you agree or disagree with it. I'm saying that in Britain,
they have it.
There really is no resistance to the crap that the politicians put up with, whether it's incompetence or whatever it is. A lot of the people have died, and none of them are going to be held to account, in my opinion. And it all comes, the Iraq Chilcot inquiry. We've got a long history of basically the British people have this mentality of, what can you do? Or, if you ask them, what do you think about politicians? It's, well, they're all bad, aren't they? Well, what are you going to do to try and hold the bad ones to account? Well, nothing, they're all bad, aren't they? Once you get that state of, basically, I accept badness is going to happen to me again and again and again. It's like a bully in a playground. When the bully comes up to you and gets your lunch money on day one, he doesn't go, oh, do you know what, that person gave me their lunch money, I'm going to leave them alone now. No, he sees a mark now. That's a free lunch for the rest of the week now. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, he's coming for your sandwiches. So that's, for me, if you don't ever hold a government to account legally and lawfully, as you are right to do, because as you've said, a lot of people have died, Craig. If you don't do something about that legally and lawfully within the confines of your judicial system, then you're asking for tyranny to be rammed right down your throat at the end of a jackboot. That's my opinion, Craig.
Yeah, well, I think you were just describing Stockholm Syndrome, and that's probably what's going on here, because it's unfathomable to imagine what else it could be. Why does it exist? But there were all kinds of ideas going through my head as you were speaking. I was thinking because it's a monarchy. A constitutional monarchy already brings into a different perspective of relationship with your governance. And the other thing that I was thinking early on when you were speaking was, well, there's the 30-year, 70-year, and 100-year secrecy orders. And that's just like, when you're trying to get to the bottom of truth, I can understand how anybody on, the British Isles could be thwarted by frustration and the realization of, how deep the rot has gone. And then you read a bit of Shakespeare and, have a beer and sit in the pissy rain and just think, God, well, this is slightly better than killing myself. and then tomorrow comes and you get through. I think you're a coping people, Jim. I think that's the only way that it makes sense to me. But, you mentioned the Yellow Vests in France. How you have to almost see that in context of they cut off the heads of their royalty, just like there's a completely different thing there. And of course, the balance of power to some degree is quite a bit different because they're also armed in a way that Brits aren't. In many ways, the Brits are toothless because of the confines of carrying a knife or anything in this society is not frowned upon as an understatement. But you go to anywhere within sight of the Eiffel Tower, and there's like knuckle dusters and rape spray and bear bangers and hey, you want a pistol? And it's just like, what? Where the hell are we? You just hand grenades, it's pretty crazy on the continent. So there's different dynamics, I think, that go on there.
So this article is a couple of weeks old now, but a few people, I thought I'd bring it up because people don't really seem to know what the fines and everything are. So I just thought I'd rack this up. So this is by Telegraph reporters, 10th of May. New fines of up to £3,200 for breaking coronavirus lockdown rules.
There it
Police
is.
will be able to issue harsher penalties after Prime Minister stresses importance of social distancing. Police will be able to issue stricter fines to people who break social distancing rules the government has announced after Boris Johnson urged Britons to stay alert to defeat coronavirus. Under the previous rules, police could issue an on-the-spot fine of £60 if someone was caught breaching the lockdown regulations, but the fines will now rise to £100, while payment within 14 days will reduce the sum to £50. Repeat offenders could see the fine double for each subsequent breach to a maximum of £3,200. So I've got to say that doesn't sound... If you're in favour of the lockdown, you obviously need to have some sort of consequence for breaking it. That doesn't seem back-breaking. 50 quid if you pay early and then double each time. It doesn't sound unreasonable to say, right, you called it again, done it again. So the whole I like the idea that it isn't up to the police officer on the spot for anywhere between 100 and 3,200 on his discretion. There's a nice clear-cut rule. You'd have got to have done it this time for it to double, this time for it to double, this time for it to double. So I actually think that that's a nice bit of common sense there.
The discretion would be, though, to not give the ticket. Because that would be the wiser discretion. Because the moment you were speaking about it, I had a picture in my head of seeing people in a park 2 days ago, and half of them were not social distancing, if I'm assessing honestly, I would say probably a lot of teenagers. But it just made me think, now you're going to have a situation where the cops have a valid reason to annoy teenagers, and that's just, it shouldn't be what these things are, or they're the breakdown of society. It's just this nitpicking by the state is ridiculous, Jim. You and I both know that people want to sit in a park and risk each other's company, then their risk is the fallout of their behavior in their social world, right? The idea of a cop getting involved and deciding to not give those 78 people a ticket and just focusing on the guy with the Motley Crue t-shirt and the tats, or whatever the next thing is. You and I both know that's what is annoying about this, is it just empowers the state to be a dick.
Yeah. I mean, there's no need to. What I'm saying is, no police officer can now come along and gut system of serial abuse. And also, the flip point of that is that is one of the philosophical negative points of living in a socialised healthcare system. Because one could argue, by living under a socialised healthcare system, which has many benefits, i.e. you're not going to get any of the medical bills that you would incur in the US, which I'm all for, and I'm a big fan of that style system, is that there is what politicians could argue, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree with their argument, I'm just saying that they could argue that I'm all for that libertarian. Well, I'm not bothering anyone in the park. Me and my friends, we're sticking to ourselves. It's our own risk, isn't it? They could go down that road of, well, yes, unless you tax it, in which case you come under our socialised healthcare system, where you are now putting a risk to others. So one could say to your argument, and I'm not saying I would necessarily say, but I'm just saying that some listeners to this show could see that point of view to go, well, actually, do you see what I mean?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course I do.
That's the philosophical point of the socialised healthcare system, is that you are now... you are in that system and now slightly beholden to one another because we're all part of it and we're all part of that social healthcare club, and we've all got to take part. Balance. Whereas in America, you can say, well, I'll get ill.
It's up to you.
Hey, well, if I get ill and go to the hospital, I'm paying for my hospital fee. So again, I'm still not affecting anyone other than myself. So there's all those different sort of schools of thought on that one.
Absolutely.
Any comments on that? My little philosophical moment.
No, I that's the balance of the of that debate, of that philosophy, is the is the individual responsible to the state if the state's paying the bill for the injuries and illness? It should you be able to smoke and still receive a new lung on national health? It's like these are philosophical questions that people deal with, and I appreciate. That's probably why I think it's Arizona. You still don't need to wear a motorbike helmet. You want to smash your head all over rocks and lizards, and you're more than welcome to it. Your skull, go out there and crush it, buddy. but here everyone's like, no, we're gonna be the ones that have to screw your head back on. So now you have to be in cotton wool to a degree. But then it's gone opposite direction in the UK, hasn't it? That's led to the health and safety. Health and safety. You've gone a bit litigious. And
I reckon that whole health and safety thing definitely plays into it in the long term, with children being raised under that system of the idea that, but basically, we're one of the most obedient nations in the world now, and we covered that in the last podcast. Sure. I think we sourced that article, according to the Telegraph and other such things. It's just one of those unfortunate situations now, but that health and safety thing has definitely taken out the idea that greater reward usually comes from a greater degree of risk. In all sorts of. Now, of course, there are pointless risks and potentially risks worth rewarding, but the whole idea that risk can be a good thing has. I don't know. I don't really seem to see it out and about much in my average daily life in Britain. Well, before the lockdown, I don't go out and about much at all now. But beforehand, you could offer. I think if you said to people, "I could give you a life of universal income where you would be able to stay inside and your food and your meals would be taken care of, and everything in your environment would be safe," and people could look at that and go, "Well, he's describing
communism
under a house of lockdown." I could also be describing being put in a padded cell and being meals a day. You're sitting there in a straight.
Fuck you, Stalin.
You'll never be harming yourself or anyone else ever again. The cells are nice and padded. You'll never have to worry about money ever again. You'll never be evicted ever again. You'll never have to worry about your meals ever again. But you would be in a straight. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people don't realise that risk and the reward that comes from succeeding in that risk is one of the things that, in my humble opinion, life is all about. Stopping those goals, achieving those goals, and if those goals are easy, then they wouldn't be goals. They'd be done. So I think it's dangerous to live in the idea of a completely safe world. I don't think it does much for the mental stimulus and the learning and everything like that. However, there's no point headbutting a brick for no reason either. But so, our next story, the Mirror.
Unless it's the last trick in the show.
The pandemic may rob ex-miners' families of payout claims for industrial diseases. This is from the Mirror. Exclusive 20 Labour MPs representing former mining towns and villages have called for Matt Hancock to make sure industrial diseases are recorded on the death certificate if an ex-miner dies of suspected COVID-19. The pandemic may deny families of ex-miners the chance to claim payouts for industrial disease. So there's a nice little one that they might be, the Tory parties are screwing over the miners 40 years later, just like they did in the 80s again. Yes. So let's move on to some more. Before we do that, let's go and give some shout-outs to we had on from podcast number 8. This is from our YouTube channel. This is Donna Teller. Tell Craig I got out. I am thousands of miles from Target. I told him he needed to get out during Brexit as a sign. Latin America, jungle, hint, there is no edge. Lockdown 2020. So that's a really cryptic...
Sure. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what that message means to you?
Sí, amigo.
Obviously some sort of
¿Qué
cryptic
pasa?
code.
I'll probably start speaking Italian if I try 4 words.
So this is a 17-year-old. He was making reference to our Greta jokes. Good on him.
Oh, nice.
He also said in Oregon, one cannot go shopping unless one lives in that county. And then you and he had a good little exchange of links of weird Oregon laws. Do you want to tell us the funniest Oregon laws for a couple of minutes?
Well, they're a strange little seeming republic within a republic. It seems they like a gun. That's interesting of Oregon. They don't mind you letting the guns around. And my experience with that has been fishing and having people like shoot skeets over your head. It's the closest I've ever come to hearing bullets going through the foliage above me. It was a real moment in life, Jim. I can tell you, just trying to catch channel cats with a couple of guys you just met because they're friends of the family, and then just hearing the reports of the guns, and then the delay, and then just shh as the pellets fly through your leaves above your head. It's like, holy shit, is this normal for you assholes? That's what visiting America is always like for Canadians. It just ends up being hideous. But law-wise, they're very strange because when you're down there, and I think it stemmed from an incident, but you're not allowed to pump your own gas. They just I'll tell you, you can't let these people in any flammable petro solvents because they can't be trusted. Believe you me. So they have what appears to be a benevolent service in pump jockeys coming out to serve you. But if you weren't from Oregon or you didn't know that, you'd think they were doing it because they were trying to give you some help, but it's actually government don't let you touch that nozzle.
they're socially distancing ahead of their times then, aren't they? Yeah. Having fewer people touch the handles of the nozzles then. So the COVID outbreaks might not have been as bad as Oregon.
Less vectors in Oregon, yeah.
So we'll do a whole segment on that in the show in the future. Thanks to Christopher from Nevada pointing out that there's some weird laws in Oregon. We'll definitely do that. Continuing, sure. Martina says, thanks for another great thought-provoking show. She talks about she'd never thought about survivors of the Black Death before, of which we were many, otherwise we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
Keep up the great work of putting the world to rights. Robbie's written, love it. And nice. We've got a nice little troll comment, which, again, I think it was episode 4 where I looked at the psychology of the troll and I said, always what you look for, you can see it.
Okay.
They're basically angry that other people are getting attention. So if you look on their wall, you'll be able to see
the reflection
about 5
of
posts
the troll.
a day and maybe 1 like on them. And so as a result, so I looked at this guy, again, it is exactly the same thing. And
signature troll.
His comment is, the real joke is still using a crappy microphone if you're already 8 episodes in. Now, what I wanted to say from that is that's a man called Will Barrow. So that's obviously someone who's trying to... He's looking at that and he's like, these people are getting up to 2,000 views an episode and they haven't even got a decent mic. I've got a funny name and everything, Will Barrow, and I'm not getting a single like on my posts. Damn right, I'm going to write something negative on you. Your microphone's crap. Now, I look at that and I think, well, I bought this new microphone. I don't know
don't show it off, Jim.
And then I looked at it and I thought, actually, it doesn't seem to have made that much difference on the sound.
Yeah.
But ever the positive to negative persons that I am, we did a sound test before, didn't we? And it turns out that I didn't effectively plug it in correctly. I plugged it in like the normal way, but you need to go onto preferences and you need to click that it's now the primary feed and not the default of the laptop and all that. So the last 2 episodes, I've had the decent mic, but I haven't plugged it in correctly. Who knows if it's even plugged in correctly for this episode? It's a trial run. But well, here's a little thought for you. if you'd have written something on that post to say, hey guys, enjoyed the podcast, can't quite hear you correctly, can see that you've got a mic, perhaps you should try plugging it in. If you'd have written something like that, then me and Craig would have offered you tickets to one of our comedy shows or anything like that. And if you're sitting there going, well, I'm
Mars
not
Bar,
what use were the tickets to me? Then maybe you should look at your personality a little bit more, because
if that's how little you contribute to a social scene.
Yeah, it's just there's ways of getting the points across to people, and if if you're just going to be negative all the time, because the whole thing here, the real joke. Now, what you've looked at that is we're two comedians here, so what's the most? You can often tell a lot about people by the way they insult you. So they will often insult you with their greatest fears that they're worried about themselves. So in this case, Will Barrow, this is obviously a joke name, he's trying to be funny and it's not working, because you can go and look on his Facebook wall, you'll see for yourself. So he's gone the real joke. So he wants to be able to dig at me and you, Craig, and he's
via our microphones.
His greatest fear is to be a comedian and not be found funny, and he's projecting that onto us. Do you see how that works? Because he's like saying, if I was a comedian, I would be afraid of people saying I wasn't funny. So I'm now going to make the remark of saying the real joke by implying that there are no other jokes in the podcast. Do you see? That's his greatest fear. So that's my message to the audience. When someone insults you, never get upset. Really listen to it, and you'll be able to interpret. They're projecting onto you the greatest fears they have about themselves. And if you go through life just being nasty to people, the internet gives people the reason to do what's in your heart and soul without consequence. And if your heart and soul is to be angry and bitter, then that's what's going to come across in the keyboard world. And you're not going to become. I'm no psychologist, but I don't think angry and bitterness is a way towards long-lasting happiness. So, Will, I don't say this to be mean to you. I say, if you're watching this podcast, now is the opportunity to take a look at yourself and go, I can be a better person and can be more positive in the world. And the lesson to everyone else listening to this is me and Craig have no technical idea. Well, I don't even know how to use a microphone, but here we are.
No, I was going to say, I think we've recovered our technical slickness by I tried to go into a different room for episode 8, and I think it's because it was artificial light that now we're not the Chaplin film that our last episode was. I think we both look sharper than the last episode did. So that's a breakthrough. Jim and I are like, we can't even believe we have microphones. Neither of them. We have no idea how they technically work. And sincere apologies from both of us if you're unable to hear us because of whatever. You can even feel worse about things because the next episode's going to be episode 10, and I'll bet you we're still not going to have it fixed then. Yeah. But we're going to be coming down that track, though.
We're not even 10 episodes in yet, and yet all our podcasts, between just on Facebook and YouTube alone, we're always getting at least 500, 600 views. We're up to 2,000.
Yeah, we're not greedy.
Episodes as well.
We're not greedy.
And we did this with no technical knowledge, poor microphone,
little knowledge.
But if you've got something to say, put it out there, because if me and Craig can do it, anyone can do it. Don't wait for it to be perfect, because perfection never comes. Better to put out a product that's imperfect that you can look at with your heart and go, yeah, I'm proud of that. It's not perfect, but I did my best.
Never going to be perfect.
Put it out there. Yeah. People will respond. And don't let the Will Barrows of the world upset you. When you go onto the internet, you are putting yourself up there to be shot at. Yeah. Go and look at pictures of cute kittens on YouTube with like 30 million views a video or anything like that. Yeah. There'll always be like 10,000 thumbs down. Who puts a thumbs down to cute little kittens? Who puts a thumb down? Who listens to the whole of the song on YouTube and goes, I hate that? There will always be negative, miserable people in the world. True. No matter what you do, put your product out. Don't let them put you down, and just be proud of what you put out. And the sort of thing that I do is I create the podcast. I bring up the sort of articles that I would want to listen to in a podcast.
Yeah.
And and listening to Craig's stories as well always cracks me up. So do something that you want to do something that you're proud of. Don't worry about it if it's not perfect, and don't worry about it if imperfect people point out your imperfections of your podcast as well. Get out there, produce. If you've got something to say it.
And I think those people you're describing, Jim, at a more than average rate get ass cancer.
Sorry, say that again?
I think those people that you're describing, and at a more than average rate, get ass cancer.
Well, there's a lot of research to say that negative thoughts can impact the health and the immune system.
It doesn't help ass cancer, that's for sure. If you already got ass cancer, God forbid.
Our final article tonight, we're not going to get through to the sinkhole or anything like that. Our final article tonight will be there's a two-faced Oregon kitten. So
speaking of
just
Oregon,
picking up for the rules of Oregon and anything like that. And I'm going to pick. If you want to see what a two-faced kitten looks like, I'm going to put the picture up on our cruise Facebook page. We can call it Dominic Cummings, couldn't we? One faced Dominic, one called Cummings. One do as I say, the other one do as I do. So if you want to see the picture of the two-faced kitten, it will be on our cruise Facebook page. That is.
What could be cuter, Jim? What could be cuter?
Yeah.
What could be cuter than a two-faced kitten?
Click like, please, on our Facebook page. Click subscribe on our YouTube page. It really does help. If you like the videos, please like them, and if you think they're worth listening to, please click
tell us.
Share button on any social media.
Share it with people you hate.
And if you've got any articles that you want us to read out, put them in the comments section of our videos.
Or stories you want to hear the end of.
So that has been episode 9 of Cruise, Comings, Goings, fan mail and internet trolls. Thank you for watching. Please like us on Facebook, please subscribe on YouTube, and please share us on social media if you think we're worth listening to. Good whatever time you're watching. Thank you very much for clicking play. Any closing comments, Mr. Campbell?
No, just looking forward to 10. We'll see you next week, and thanks again for watching.
Facebook at 6 p.m. on Thursday. YouTube at 9 p.m. on Thursday. That's UK times. Cheers.